What if I told you that the most dangerous man in WWE history just got answered? Not by a champion, not by a legend, not by someone who had months to prepare, but by a man who looks like he was built in a laboratory specifically designed to end careers. A man who doesn't walk to the ring, he stalks it. A man whose family name alone sends a chill through the entire locker room. Ladies and gentlemen, if you thought WrestleMania season couldn't get any more electric, any more unpredictable, any more absolutely unhinged, then you clearly weren't paying attention when Jacob Fatu stepped up and stared straight into the eye of the storm that is Brock Lesnar's Open WrestleMania challenge. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear is not just a wrestling story. This is a collision of two forces of nature that the wrestling world has been whispering about in dark corners and screaming about on social media. This is the moment everything changed. Welcome to Wrestling Impact. Let's get into it. Now, to truly understand why this moment hit so differently, why it made jaws drop and phones light up across the entire wrestling community, we have to go back and talk about Brock Lesnar issuing that Open WrestleMania challenge. Because when Brock Lesnar speaks, the entire industry listens. Not out of respect alone, out of something deeper, something closer to primal instinct. Brock Lesnar doesn't cut promos to entertain you. He cuts promos to issue warnings. And when the beast incarnate stood in the center of that ring, microphone in hand, that familiar cold, dead stare locked onto the camera, and issued an open challenge for WrestleMania, the kind of challenge that suggests he doesn't care who answers because he fully believes nobody can stop him, the wrestling world collectively held its breath. Think about what an Open WrestleMania challenge from Brock Lesnar actually means. This isn't a friendly invitation. This is Brock Lesnar essentially saying, come face your consequences on the grandest stage of them all. Lesnar has conquered the WWE Championship more times than most superstars have main event pay-per-views. He ended The Undertaker's legendary WrestleMania streak. He has demolished Roman Reigns, John Cena, The Big Show, and a long list of competitors who were considered the biggest, baddest, most physically imposing athletes in the business. When Brock Lesnar throws down a challenge, the natural human response even for a professional wrestler is hesitation. Even a moment of self-doubt. Because you're not just stepping up to a match, you're stepping up to a force of nature wrapped in a man's body. And yet, the music hit, the lights shifted, and Jacob Fatu walked out. Let that sink in for a second. Jacob Fatu, the Samoan Werewolf. A man who, from the very first moment he set foot in a WWE ring, felt different. Not just because of his size, though make no mistake, the man is an absolute physical specimen. Not just because of his pedigree, though being part of the legendary Anoa'i family, the same wrestling dynasty that produced The Rock, Roman Reigns, the Usos, and Umaga, certainly carries weight. No, Jacob Fatu feels different because of the way he moves, the way he carries himself. There is something almost preternatural about the man. He does things in that ring that someone his size simply should not be able to do. Moonsaults, handspring attacks. He moves with the agility of a cruiserweight and hits with the force of a wrecking ball. When Jacob Fatu is locked in, when that intensity burns behind his eyes, he doesn't look like a wrestler. He looks like a predator. So when his music hit and he came walking down that ramp, the arena didn't just erupt. It transformed. You could feel the electricity shift in the room. Fans who moments ago were sitting comfortably in their seats were suddenly on their feet, phones raised, mouths open. Because everyone watching understood what was happening. This wasn't just anyone answering Lesnar's challenge. This was someone who might actually be capable of matching him. Someone who the wrestling world had been quietly, carefully, cautiously wondering about ever since he burst onto the main roster scene. What happens when Jacob Fatu steps into the ring with the absolute best? With someone who doesn't just win matches but dismantles opponents psychologically before the bell even rings? We were about to find out. Picture the scene inside that arena. The tension hanging in the air like smoke. Brock Lesnar standing in the ring, that smirk on his face, the kind of smirk that tells you he's already 3 steps ahead of whatever comes through that curtain. Paul Heyman at ringside, ever the genius architect of Lesnar's psychological warfare, whispering into his ear, keeping that competitive mind sharp and focused. And then here comes Fatu, moving down that aisle with purpose, with zero hesitation, no flinching, no slowing down. He doesn't stop at ringside to soak in the moment. He doesn't play to the crowd. He locks his eyes on Lesnar and keeps walking. That right there told you everything. He's not here to be a moment. He's here to make one. The crowd is absolutely losing their minds. Half of them are chanting for Fatu. Half of them are chanting for Lesnar. And some of them, if we're being honest, are probably chanting because they don't know what else to do with the energy that's building inside them like a pressure cooker about to blow. Because there's a very specific kind of excitement that only pro wrestling can generate. That feeling when you're watching something happen and your brain is simultaneously telling you this is real, this matters, these are two genuine forces of nature about to collide, and I absolutely cannot look away. Now here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating. Because Brock Lesnar, for all of his ice-cold exterior, for all of his carefully crafted image as the unstoppable beast who fears nothing and no one, had a reaction when Jacob Fatu stepped through those ropes. And it wasn't dismissal. It wasn't a laugh. There was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible if you weren't watching closely, where Lesnar's eyes adjusted, where the smirk softened, just slightly, into something more focused, more calculated. And veterans of the wrestling world know exactly what that means. When Brock Lesnar actually looks at you, not through you, not past you, but directly at you with full attention and recalibration, that's when you know the challenge has been accepted on every possible level. Paul Heyman, being the extraordinary showman and strategist that he is, grabbed the microphone first, and in that classic Heyman fashion, he began to speak. He acknowledged Fatu's family. He acknowledged his ability. He, even in this is the part that made the crowd react, acknowledged his potential. But then he did what Heyman always does. He reframed the entire narrative. He reminded everyone in that building and everyone watching at home that potential means nothing when you're standing across the ring from a man who doesn't deal in potential. A man who deals exclusively in results, in devastation, in the kind of physical and psychological dominance that doesn't care about your bloodline or your athletic gifts or how impressive you look on paper. Brock Lesnar, Paul Heyman declared, is the exception to every rule that Jacob Fatu thinks applies to him. And then Fatu took the microphone. Now listen. Jacob Fatu is not known primarily as a talker. His communication style in that ring is physical, visceral. He tells his stories with his body, with his intensity, with the way he absorbs punishment and keeps coming. But in this moment, the man had something to say, and he said it with the kind of quiet, controlled fury that is somehow more terrifying than screaming. He looked at Paul Heyman. He looked at Brock Lesnar. And he said something to the effect of, "You asked for anyone to step up. Everyone was too afraid." I'm not everyone. The arena absolutely erupted. Because that's the thing about Jacob Fatu that makes him such a compelling figure. He doesn't need to convince you he's dangerous. You can see it. You can feel it radiating off of him like heat from an open flame. He doesn't need to list his accomplishments or remind you of his family legacy. He shows up and lets his presence speak before he ever opens his mouth. So when he does speak, when those few, precise, carefully chosen words come out, they land like a finishing move. Heavy, undeniable, final. Lesnar's response was classic Lesnar. A slow nod, that unsettling smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and then he looked at Fatu with the kind of expression that suggested he had just received a gift. Not a threat, a gift. Because this is the other fascinating psychological layer to Brock Lesnar. He doesn't want easy opponents. Somewhere beneath all of that beast mode branding is a legitimate competitor who wants to test himself, who wants to face someone worthy. And Jacob Fatu, in that moment, presented himself as worthy in a way that very few people ever have. The WrestleMania implications here are absolutely staggering. Think about what this match represents on the grandest stage of them all. On one side, you have the established monster, the legend, the man whose WrestleMania record is the stuff of nightmares for every opponent he's faced. And on the other side, you have the new force, the generational talent, the man who could very realistically become the defining superstar of the next decade if given the right stage. And what bigger stage exists in professional wrestling than WrestleMania? The storytelling potential alone is enough to make any wrestling fan practically vibrate with anticipation. Will Fatu be able to overcome the psychological weight of facing a man who has beaten literally everyone who came before him? Can he absorb the punishment that Lesnar delivers, the German suplexes that fold men in half, the F5 that has ended careers, and keep going? And conversely, can Brock Lesnar deal with someone whose speed and athleticism might counteract his usual game plan? Someone who doesn't just stand there and let you hit him but who attacks from angles that a man Lesnar's size simply isn't used to defending? Because here's the tactical reality that makes this matchup so genuinely compelling on a wrestling level. Lesnar's greatest weapon is his ability to take control early, establish dominance, and make the match feel like an execution rather than a competition. He's done it over and over again. He controls the pace, he controls the space, and once he has you grounded and in his clutches, the match is essentially over. The Suplex City Express makes one final stop and that's it. Good night, thank you for participating. But Jacob Fatu doesn't operate on a normal timeline. He doesn't get grounded in the way that most big men do. His agility, his second rope moonsault, his handspring attacks, these aren't just flashy moves. They're strategic tools that prevent opponents from locking in that controlling grip that Lesnar relies on. You can't slow down what you can't catch. And Jacob Fatu is faster than anyone his size has any right to be. Lesnar will need to adapt. He will need to be more careful, more calculated than perhaps he has been in recent years. And that adaptation itself creates drama, creates uncertainty, creates those razor-edge moments where anything feels possible. And isn't that the absolute heart of what makes professional wrestling great? That feeling of genuine uncertainty. That moment before the bell rings where you look at two competitors and you honestly, truly cannot say with complete confidence who is going to walk out victorious. Because both of them, both Lesnar and Fatu, are entirely believable as winners. That is rare. That is precious. That is WrestleMania magic. The backstage atmosphere following this confrontation, by all accounts, was electric in the most productive sense of the word. Wrestlers in the locker room were reportedly fired up, talking about the match, debating the outcome with that specific passionate energy that only appears when something genuinely significant happens. Because wrestlers know better than anyone what different levels of talent and danger look like. And to have an entire locker room buzzing about a matchup, to have the people who compete against these men every single week treating this confrontation with awe and excitement that tells you everything you need to know about the magnitude of what just went down. Fans on social media were absolutely beside themselves. The clips of Fatu walking down that ramp, of that face-to-face confrontation, of those few words exchanged, they spread like wildfire. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a prediction. The wrestling community, which let's be honest can sometimes be divided and cynical, found itself largely unified in one sentiment: this is the match. This is the WrestleMania moment we didn't know we needed until it was right in front of us. And here's the thing about WrestleMania moments that separates the ones you remember forever from the ones that fade by the following Monday. The best WrestleMania moments feel inevitable and shocking at the same time. They feel like the story was always building to this point, even if nobody saw it coming until it happened. Jacob Fatu answering Brock Lesnar's open challenge has that quality. In hindsight, of course it was going to be Fatu. Of course it had to be this matchup. Of course the universe was aligning these two forces on the grandest stage for a reason. But in the moment, when it happened, it felt like the ground shifted. Like wrestling had just leveled up in real time. Now we have to talk about what Jacob Fatu proving himself on this stage would mean for the entire landscape of WWE going forward. Because a victory over Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania doesn't just add a win to your record. It's a statement. It's a declaration heard around the wrestling world. The men who have beaten Lesnar at WrestleMania have used those victories as launching pads for legendary careers. Winning this match would place Fatu in an entirely different category. It would essentially announce to every title holder, every main event superstar, every faction and every competitor in WWE that there is a new apex predator in the building, and he just put down the most dangerous beast this company has ever produced. Alternatively, and this is the dramatic tension that keeps the story alive, what happens if Lesnar wins? What happens if the Beast Incarnate does what the Beast Incarnate does and reasserts his dominance in the most visceral, definitive way possible? Does that devastate Fatu's momentum? Well, here's the fascinating counterargument to that concern. Jacob Fatu surviving in that ring with Brock Lesnar, pushing him to his limits, making the Beast work harder than he's worked in years even in defeat, that story elevates Fatu. Because the competitors who have gone the distance with Lesnar and come out with their heads held high have earned tremendous respect from fans and peers alike. There is no bad outcome for Jacob Fatu in this story. There is only varying degrees of greatness. The road to WrestleMania from this point forward is going to be must-see television. Every week leading up to that moment, every interaction, every promo, every stare down between these two men is going to carry enormous weight. Because now the stakes have been established. Now we know what's on the line. Not just a match result, but legacies. Not just a WrestleMania memory, but a statement about who belongs at the absolute pinnacle of this industry. Jacob Fatu answered the challenge that nobody else dared to answer. In doing so, he didn't just accept a match. He accepted his destiny. He stepped into the fire because he genuinely believes he can walk back out of it. And that belief, that unshakable, undeniable, almost supernatural confidence combined with the very real physical ability to back it up is what makes him the most exciting new force in WWE today. WrestleMania is going to be different this year. It's going to have a match that people will talk about for years, not because of pyro or spectacle or celebrity appearances, because two legitimate forces of nature stepped into the same ring and asked and answered the most fundamental question in professional wrestling: who is truly the most dangerous man alive? We are going to find out, and I genuinely cannot wait. If you made it this far in this video, you already know what to do. Drop a comment right now and tell me who you think walks out of WrestleMania with the victory, Brock Lesnar or Jacob Fatu. I want to read every single one of your predictions. Hit that like button if this video got your blood pumping, because trust me, we are just getting started on covering every single development in this story as WrestleMania season rolls forward. Subscribe to Wrestling Impact so you don't miss a single moment, because this, right here, is where the real wrestling conversation lives. We'll see you in the next one.